Happy Solstice 2020 and blessings. Celebrating the historic winter solstice of 2020. Given the amazing event that's underway with Jupiter Saturn Conjunction, I thought I'd put together this little presentation to share some deeper insights about the astrological perspective that is in the background to this event. Now, we all know that winter solstice is an ancient celebration, and for good reason. It's nature's new year. I refer to it as the return of the sun, the annual solar return. And it is indeed a sacred event, if you choose to make it that. And that has certainly been what many people over the ages and throughout all cultures in the world have done. And it does mark, in the more modern sense, with the calendar, a 10-day countdown that begins today on winter solstice as we sail into the mystery of a new year. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which is getting a lot of airtime, of course, and largely due to the astronomical sort of eye candy perspective, which is really spectacular because the proximity of closeness of the two giant planets, the gas giants, which are the two furthest planets away that we can see with our naked eye, forming a conjunction that manifests as like a single apparent star in the sky, and what's dubbed the Star of Bethlehem and otherwise the Christmas star, etc., is very, exciting. Again, it hasn't occurred for 800 years. That is not strictly the astrological story, though. That's more the astronomical story, and they do share, of course, in common ground there. But the very fact that it's occurring on winter solstice is the first powerful suggestion that this is a very, very special event. So it's not just that they're conjunct, which is, again, very important and rare, every 800 years about. And also that it happens right on winter solstice, and furthermore at 0 degrees Aquarius. Those three factors are the foundation of what makes this extra special. I decided to take a quick look at the Mayan perspective. I always like to do that from the dream spell, and the day for today, December 21st, 2020, is Blue Resonant Hand. And the little poem reads, I channel in order to know, inspiring healing. I seal the store of accomplishment with the resonant tone of attunement. I'm guided by the power of self-generation. The number 7, which is what this is, resonant in this system is 7, can be understood as the ceremony at the top of the pyramid, or the ziggurat. It's the peak point in the cycle of 13 days. Now, what's woven within that, in my interpretation, is the raising of your vibration. And so these are just some key words here that suggest how to do that. Raising one's vibration is always a good idea from the standpoint of health and happiness, etc. But at this rather crucial and interesting time in history, we're being invited even more, if we're awake, to be aware, to raise our vibration for the sake of what is understood as the ascension process, which is a rather large other story. But the idea is that humanity is in an ascension process historically, where for quite some centuries we're in a descent. Now we're back in an ascent. And that did begin quite some time ago, but it really is beginning to accelerate now. And so anything you can do to raise your vibration, from your thoughts to your the way you live your life, the food you eat, your lifestyle in general, with whether you are maintaining good attitude or meditating, choosing to be happy, exercising spiritual attitudes like compassion, acknowledging beauty, and just all of the such types of orientations. You can make your own list, but there you go. There's a pretty good one for you to work with. Now, I also think it's an important time, given what's going on in the world, for us to, direct our thoughts and minds and hearts in a prayerful way to help establish truth in power. we're certainly seeing a lot of deception on the airways, propaganda, a lot of, what can be described literally as lies and corruption, etc. So, it's not a new story, but here it is, and it's important for our times. And given this pivotal turning point historically, not only for each nation, but for the planet as a whole, it's a good time for us to give consideration that we might be able to contribute in a co-creative way. So it's, given all the controversy and the disparity and the, conflict between who represents the most integral and powerful form of leadership, I generally want to just offer that we pray for those who would occupy positions of power be in that focus of truth, and above all, it's not about power. So let's let our thoughts and prayers guide whoever stands for truth and higher wisdom and vision and so forth, as opposed to corruption, to take that position. It also has to do with recognizing that we are spiritual beings, human souls having human experiences, material experiences. But materialism is the notion that it's all random and arbitrary, and astrology very clearly illustrates that that is certainly not the case, and that's why it dovetails with a spiritual consciousness. Now, I did quickly draw cast the chart for this day, and you'll see here basically there's Jupiter and Saturn. Those are the symbols there. This is what's called a bold chart, but rather than challenge you with having to understand the details of astrology, I just thought I'd make a list. So this is the overview of what's called the planetary weights. Whenever we look at a natal chart or any chart in astrology, the goal, the art of astrology, based on the science in the background as well, is to weigh the planets. So first of all, the Jupiter Saturn conjunction is the driver of the chart because it's the closest, most powerful aspect. So it represents generally an awakening, a social economic revolution, in fact. Now, the whole chart is what's called a bull chart pattern, and it comes with the impulse for many new experiences. So we should get ready for that. That's a vague reference, but just be aware that the bull tends to move quickly from one experience to the next, and it can be quite staggered and not linear. Third, Venus in Sagittarius in that chart is what's called the lead planet. Now, Venus is the planet of desire and love, and Sagittarius is linked to culture, truth, principles, ethics. So, and as well in this what's called solar chart, Venus is the planet of highest elevation, and I'm happy to report in accidental exaltation in the 12th house. So that celebrates a real strong orientation towards these principles, truth, ethics, and the love of culture as well. So that will be a part of that revolution. Uranus, meanwhile, is in Taurus as the trailing planet of this bull chart pattern, and it represents changes in the economy. Well, we've all heard about the economic reset, and the cryptocurrency is certainly that new mode of economic exchange, which is very powerful and moving very quickly. I think it's undeniable and unavoidable at this stage. So you might want to look into it if you haven't already. Mercury in Capricorn is very important in this chart for a variety of reasons. One is because it's very closely aligned to the Sun, and the other is because it's the ruling planet for the lunar north node. And when a planet's out of bounds, it represents extremes of attitude, and in the sign of Capricorn, generally representing governments. Mars in Aries is in what's called the solar 4th house, and that's a difficult place. Mars in Aries is in honor, the planet of war, in the sign of pioneering, etc. In the 4th house is definitely somewhat difficult, but this is just one chart. But it on its own, it does represent deep renovation, change, which could manifest in aggressive, even abusive manners. So you want to be aware of that. there's an indication of that linked back to that revolutionary principle. Yeah, we're going to see more, social unrest and various aggressive periods over the course of the year, especially with the powerful aspects that Mars will be making over the course of 2021, which I'll share more about in the forecast for the year 2021. Mars at this particular day is exactly square Pluto, which is very radical. And it does also represent further draconian measures by the establishment, by the government. And anybody watching the news will recognize that's happening. Especially, I suppose, if you watch the alternative news at this point, because it appears that mainstream news has largely become quite propaganda-based and slanted, full of spin. If you're not aware of that, it might be worthwhile to consider it. If you just expose yourselves to the mainstream media, you should realize that it is privately owned, and anybody who's really is thinking critically would recognize that the news is not quite the news. It's just what you're being told. So that's part of the awakening, by the way. The moon in Pisces is the planet of highest degree, and it just so happens to be void of course. Now, a void of course moon is very Piscean-like. So to have the moon in Pisces and void of course is a double whammy. Now, the void of course is a really interesting phenomenon, and it's not a very straightforward, linear, kind of matter-of-fact alpha kind of principle at all. It's very omega. It's very diffusive, very what can on the high side represent heightened psychic sensitivity, spiritual aspiration, meditation, prayer. At worst, it's murky and uncertain and confused. So that is quite something to be aware of in the very first moment of the Jupiter Saturn conjunction, which is represents a 20-year cycle. The moon is void of course. And I thought, well, the universe does have a sense of humor, you might say. And it's more important than it may seem, and it will unfold over the coming days, weeks, months, years, literally. And it'll be interesting to watch. It's not the only factor, but it's in the foundational chart. It's in the seed event. So that's quite significant. There'll be more to say about that in the course of time. Neptune in this chart is in Pisces, which is really beautiful because it rules Pisces. And so it actually represents the, there's two planets in their own sign, which what we call the final dispositor. One is Saturn, but that's a co-ruler because the modern ruler for Aquarius is Uranus. So Neptune really holds the king position here, and which is really quite wonderful because Neptune's all about spirituality, and especially that it's at the apex point between the north and south node, so it's 90 degrees away from both, is very significant. So it's a all very clear representation that humanity is undergoing a spiritual awakening, what could be called a spiritual initiation or rebirth. So it does also, with that square, represent the need for governments to be more compassionate, less draconian, less fear-based. And that's a big issue, and that's going to be one of the bigger tests over the coming, again, days, weeks, months, and years. Chiron in this chart is in the solar fourth, which generally represents a search for new identity. So there's something there to be aware of because that's really strong as the global village emerges, and the whole notion of globalism is there versus nationalism, which seems really appropriate. The problem is that it's not guided by a clear constitution, and that's one of the deeper themes that's good to be aware of, by the way, is if it's just going to be, the members of the UN, for example, are appointed as opposed to elected, and there's no real clear constitution for rights and freedoms, and we should all be quite concerned about that. So that's a political consideration for you. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is representative of a 20-year economic cycle, by the way. It's important to note that. But it, in this case, is also the beginning of a 220-year era, which I'm going to illustrate here in a moment. So Jupiter conjunct Saturn has occurred in up to this point in Earth signs 8 of the last 9 times, and there was even one, well, in 1802, which was in Virgo, an Earth sign. Then there was one in Aries, and then there was 8 of the last 9 in Earth signs again. So it does that, has this rather interesting algorithm where it occurs repeatedly in the same element with a few on occasion, anomalous jump into another element, but largely, by and large, it's the theme of one particular element, and that one was all Earth. And this new cycle is linked to air, but let's get closer to this. So the era of Jupiter in Earth signs, Jupiter conjunct Saturn in Earth signs, largely, again, really 1802. But then those Aries, then 1840, and then back in 1980, there was one in Libra, which is rather interesting. So you see this Capricorn, Virgo, Taurus, Capricorn, Virgo, Taurus, Capricorn, Libra, Taurus. They're all Earth signs, and so that little anomalous jog is because the planets have elliptical orbits, and they don't always, arrive at the same timing as they would the last time. It's rather interesting that occurs. But it does, and it's all part of the way that astrology, works with a certain amount of anomaly within the otherwise rather set and consistent rhythmic pattern of planets orbiting the sun, which from the standpoint of astrology is interpreted from the Earth's perspective because that's where we are. But it doesn't dismiss the other, the heliocentric perspective. So the main thing of Earth is money, economy, infrastructure, science, technology, engineering. Just think about how strong that has been over the past 200 and so years, right? The whole world went from horse and buggy and, rather semi-primitive, not very advanced in sciences and medicine and all of the things that we've become very familiar with and rather take for granted. It's all, brand new. So we've built up the world in that. Now, in the next 9 of 10 Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, they will be in air element signs. And except for one in 2060, which will be in Scorpio, that's a fair amount of time away, 140 years from now. So none of us will be really here to talk about it, except, we won't go there. Era of Jupiter conjunct Saturn in air signs begins once again in 2020. So you see Aquarius, Libra, Gemini, Aquarius, Libra, Gemini, Aquarius, Scorpio, Gemini, Aquarius. So 4 times in the sign of Aquarius, beginning and ending the era of Jupiter Saturn conjunctions, by and large in air signs, which does represent. Air signs are very social, but also sharing and exchanging intellectual ideas, perceptions, attitudes, interpretations, and which is very, those are Gemini themes. Libra in this equation is all about equality, justice, liberalism, fairness. Aquarius, which is the main focus in terms of this being also the age of Aquarius, which I'll get back to in a moment, but also that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is happening in Aquarius, so at least for now, is all about revolution, humanism, democracy. So there's a lot of social issues on the airwaves, and, they're fueled at worst by media spin, which is not interested in sharing truth, but, has what can be described as an agenda of a political economic sort. It's always good to be aware of that. So society, intellectuality, politics, these are all air element principles, humanism, justice, dialogue, debate. That's what we're entering into. I mean, it's not new. This has been going on at least very strongly since the advent of the internet becoming public domain, which is where I point us to the real true dawning of the age of Aquarius. This one is very much, this particular conjunction happening here on Winter Solstice 2020 is very much the next installment of the age of Aquarius. So it's not the beginning. Many people are saying that, and it's valid enough, but synchronicity should be recognized more than it would be otherwise considered. And it does so happen in the early 90s, there was a Uranus-Neptune conjunction. And those are further planets, bigger planets. And when they form a conjunction, it's a bigger event. So it's ironic, a little counterintuitive, that the far slow-moving planets, well, it makes sense. They have more gravity, more torque. So it's a little, again, not about physics because they're so far away. It wouldn't seem they have a lot of pull. But in the grand scheme of things, in the paradigm of metaphysics and how astrology works, they do. So the very fact that it was a major aspect between those, which is about a cycle that occurs about every 170 years, is what's very significant. But more immediately, that Uranus-Neptune conjunction, which was in Capricorn, so it was a revolution and awakening principle of those two planets challenging Capricorn, which represents the status quo. So that's itself a very strong indication of a new beginning. And I attribute it myself to the age of Aquarius, especially with also the advent of the World Wide Web, the internet going public, which occurred in 1993. So that's where I give my vote for the age of Aquarius, but this most certainly represents the next major installment. So there you go, a few great insights. I hope you enjoyed that, and a little bit more than what you might be hearing out there, because there's a lot of sensation. There's lots of people talking about it, and I'm sure there's a lot of great insights to be heard. There's more to say, especially with the advent of 2021 coming, which will be a major year, no doubt about it. And so I've put together a video for my members for that. So I hope you'll consider becoming a member if you're not already, so you can have access to it. But I thought I'd share this one with you. And I will remind you that I'm also having a Christmas sale, the annual Christmas sale I do, which is really good. So if you want to visit my website, sunstarrastrology.com, you can learn about it there. It's quite clear once you arrive what you'll be led to see what they are, and hopefully you'll be able to take advantage of those, as it is quite a big savings. So thank you for your time. Many blessings, and many blessings for Winter Solstice 2020.